Overcoming by Pure Foy's Girl. Chapter 47. Yes. It was a wonder that a single word could alter the course of a man's life, but Hannibal sat still in his chair, staring up at the most wondrous person he could ever imagine, and felt that word resonate through his heart with a vibrancy that threatened to steal his breath away. It nearly stole Will's as well, the bond setting him adrift in his husband's profound joy. Hannibal's pleasure and relief and trembling hope fed into him in a chaos of emotions, but all of it was wrapped in the glorious bliss of his love.
"Are you certain?"
Hannibal asked, because it was too good to be true, too much what he desired, too tremulous a hope to trust when he knew too well that he didn't deserve him, that he could never deserve him. Tears rose in his amber eyes, the turmoil of his feelings welling up to spill down his cheeks.
"Is this a dream I'm doomed to wake from?"
"I'm certain, Hannibal," Will murmured, smoothing his tears away. "I've made my decision. My place is with you, and our home is one another. The family that loves and respects me is ours together."
"Will,"
Hannibal said, smiling from the bloom of love within him.
"Should you ever change your mind?"
"I won't. I'm greedy for you, Hannibal Lecter," Will said, bending to nuzzle his nose to Hannibal's. "I will always choose you."
"I can hardly believe it,"
Hannibal said, a soft, delighted laugh escaping him. Will sank down to sit in his lap, and Hannibal wrapped both arms around him, eyes sweeping closed as he hugged his mate tight.
"Oh, gods, please don't let me wake, if this truly is a dream."
"I've kept you waiting for so long," Will whispered, grasping Hannibal's jaw with both hands. He curled against him, resting his forehead to his husband's, and pulling his earthy scent deep into his lungs, savoring the fact that he could do such a thing. After all of this time, he could reach out and find someone reaching back, always reaching back for him.
"Certainly not longer than I kept you waiting,"
Hannibal said, trembling and almost hesitant, as he raised his hand to Will's face in return. His long fingers spread, sliding with delicacy to smooth Will's curls behind his ear, settling his palm against Will's cheek.
"Have you any idea how happy you've made me?"
"I do," Will said, smoothing his hands down Hannibal's shoulders and turning to kiss his husband's salty palm. He rubbed his sharp little fangs over the meat of Hannibal's hand in a gentle nip, watching him from beneath the heavy fringe of his long lashes. "I can feel how happy I've made you. Well enough to tell you it's not nearly as happy as you've made me in return, Hannibal."
"Well,"
Hannibal said, slipping his hand down Will's long throat and over the graceful length of his body to rest on his long thigh, fingers spreading over tight muscle.
"I've been waiting for this moment so anxiously, nervous that something might sway you to turn away from me."
"You don't have to be anxious anymore. I am yours," Will told him, echoing the words Hannibal had spoken to him that night at Chelsea House, the night he'd learned of the bond and first confessed his love. He leaned into Hannibal, offering the comfort of his scent and the warmth of his touch, whispering with perfect recollection, "I swear by all the gods, Hannibal, I am yours and yours alone, if not forever, and for as long as you'll have me."
"It frightens me sometime, you know,"
Hannibal breathed, more tears slipping unheeded down his cheek, gazing into Will's eyes so intently it almost made him blush.
"How much I love you. I never thought I would ever have such a gift, Will, but you gave it to me against all expectation."
"Don't let it frighten you," Will whispered, kissing Hannibal's tears away, the warm weight of his body a reminder to his husband that he was here, that the decision had been made in his favor. "You are my husband, and I will protect you, Hannibal."
"Not from yourself,"
Hannibal said, nuzzling Will as he brushed those coaxing kisses over his face.
"Not from your knees, not from your wit, and certainly not from my love for you. Let it frighten me, Will. Let it remind me every moment how lucky I am that you gave me a second chance I never deserved."
Will drew back only a little, lashes mingling as they breathed one another in, basking in their closeness, warm with shared affection.
"I promise to dedicate myself to your happiness. I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret this decision, Will."
"Hannibal," Will whispered, thumb gently wiping another stray tear that rolled down his face. You do know that you make me happy, don't you?
I try to make you happy, Will,
Hannibal said, baring the tips of his heavy fangs in a slight smile. There was a vulnerability in him that touched Will to his depths when he confessed.
I hope to.
You do, Will told him, shifting higher in his lap, trying to get closer to him within the confines of the fireside chair. You make me happy, Hannibal. Not the gifts, not the beautiful clothing, not the riches you're so intent on giving me, but you. He slid his hand beneath Hannibal's jaw and urged his husband's head up, needing to have his say. All my life I've been alone. All my life I've been told that I'm an offense to common decency, too much of one, not enough of the other, in either direction to ever suit anyone in this world. I thought I would always be alone, burdened with a gift I never asked for, an object of pity and ridicule and revilement. But then you saw me, Hannibal. Hannibal tipped his head, pressing his forehead to Will's, drawing every soft breath into his lungs because he could never be close enough, never be as much a part of his mate as he longed to be. You see me as I am, Will said, a trace of wonder tinging his words even still. Everything that my father despises you exalt. The things that have always separated me from others you delight in and admire. You see me and you love me, and you never leave me in a moment's doubt of your affections, Hannibal. Being with you, knowing you, seeing you, that is what makes me happy. You brought our teacup together again, Hannibal. Our shattered potential has been healed, just as you promised.
Will,
Hannibal whispered, tipping his head to kiss him, a thrill running through him when Will's fingers clenched on him, a clutch for balance in the midst of heady emotion, a touch seeking the solid reassurance he would always give, always and forever. I have lived in fear for so long that anything which brought me happiness would be stripped from me, that I hadn't any right to such thing, Will said, his words muffled in Hannibal's mouth as they kissed. But you loved me, despite my reservations, fearlessly and fervently. When I'm with you, I never fear the consequences, and know that I would gladly fight even fate herself to stay by your side, because I know you're fighting just as fiercely to stay by mine. Hannibal's arm slid up against his back, drawing Will in tight, his other hand moving swiftly to cup the back of Will's head, fingers buried in his curls as he embraced him. Always and forever could never be long enough, but we'll do our best to be content with it. They parted only far enough for another kiss, molten with hunger and need, each prickle of sharp teeth and each tease of soft tongue a testament to their shared relief. The decision was made. Will had chosen him, and the joy of it was nearly too much for Hannibal to bear.
I love you, Will,
he said, the words half a moan into Will's parted mouth, his thoughts derailed by the nip of Will's teeth.
More than anything in the world, I love you.
The chair creaked a warning loudly enough that Will eased back, flushed and disheveled from Hannibal's stroking hands and frantic kisses, his curls spilling down his neck to whisper against Hannibal's hand where it gripped his shoulder. He cocked his head, stroking both hands through Hannibal's hair, and told him, I missed you terribly while you were gone. Did I tell you that? Hannibal's fine lips parted in a slow smile, amber eyes crinkling.
I hoped you would.
You'll have to be patient with me, Hannibal, Will said, a flicker of uncertainty flitting across his beautiful face. I'm not used to being loved. There's so much I don't know even still.
We'll learn together,
Hannibal said, capturing Will's wrist and bringing it to his lips to kiss the soft skin where his pulse beat. You abandoned yourself to your impulses and indulged them, Will said, shivering at the heat of Hannibal's mouth against his skin. Whereas I must seem so cold at times.
I have never found you so. You're cautious and thoughtful and not given to excess,
Hannibal whispered, bringing a smile to his husband's face. He kissed Will's palm before pressing it to his cheek and said,
I delight in your nature, Will. I delight in everything about you. You are a wonder to me, every bit a wonder to me.
As you are to me, Will said, gripped with sudden shyness. He wanted to say those words as Hannibal did, with ease and sincerity, but they seemed trapped behind his teeth, lodged somewhere in his chest where he couldn't seem to shake them free, no matter how much he longed to. Yet it seemed to content Hannibal by the unbridled pleasure that flowed into Will through his bond. He slid forward in the creaking chair with Will in his lap and teased his lips with another kiss, neither one able to resist the lure of the other. Will shifted against him, and Hannibal put a steadying hand on his thigh, absently sliding his fingers beneath Will's silky wrapper to glide along his skin. And he touched lace. "Hannibal?" Will breathed into his mouth, surprised when his husband suddenly went still beneath him. Sudden realization made him grin, and he gripped Hannibal's wrist to guide his hand higher, fingers tracing the edge of the lace around the top of his thigh to the round swell of his backside. "Do you disapprove?" Hannibal's mouth parted on a silent gasp, his eyes gleaming as he cupped Will's bottom. He made no move to stop his mate when he slipped from his lap, but his hands curled to clasp the lingering warmth of Will's skin as it faded. Will slowly untied the sash on his wrapper, deft movements still shadowed with shyness, but his blue eyes alight with anticipation. The silky material clung to his skin like a lover's kiss, sliding in a near soundless whisper, slithering over the firm muscles of his arms to catch at the bend of his elbows before slipping free to pull at his slender feet. Hannibal couldn't breathe for a moment, couldn't think or speak. Nothing in his experience with Will's dangerous knees had prepared him for the sight of his sultry-eyed mate in a silk and lace bodysuit of such a deep red it appeared almost black in the firelight. It did everything Nicola promised and so much more, clinging to every curve and dip of Will's firm body from his chest to the tops of his thighs, the thin straps so delicate it seemed a harsh look might snap them, the lace panels showing his skin beneath, the dark silk creased by the pebbled hardness of his nipples and bulging at his groin to hold his impressive sex in place. "Well?" Will asked, the corner of his mouth curving up, his faint reservations regarding the clothing evaporating in the face of Hannibal's stunned delight. "What do you think? Still little better than a boy in a dress?" Hannibal swallowed hard, just staring at his beautiful mate, but there was no mistaking the arousal that lay behind his stunned admiration, and he made no move to dampen it for the sake of their bond. He hoped Will felt every bit of it, that it would speak so much more eloquently than he himself ever could.
"You're not a boy, Will,"
he finally breathed, reaching out to trace the line of his thigh where the firelight threw a shadow against the gleaming highlight on his smooth, hairless skin.
"You're an omega, best of both made one, strong when you need to be, soft when it suits you, but always everything I could ask for, and so much more, what I never knew I needed until you gave it to me."
It was an unexpected confession, his spontaneous ode to Will's gender, a tender praise that Will sorely needed after the frustrations of their evening and his reminders of his father's odious beliefs. The touch on his skin was electric, Hannibal's desire for him matched only by his delight in his intelligence, his humor, his everything. Hannibal's love spurred his desire, his need to touch born of his need to immerse himself in Will, and it brought a self-conscious, pleased grin to Will's mouth to feel the truth of it pouring through his bond. "You know," he said, reaching out to smooth a stray hair from Hannibal's brow, his fingers tracing a path down his temple to the high jut of his stark cheekbone. "You get this same look of dazed rapture on your face when you find me clever."
"Do I?"
Hannibal asked, gliding his fingertips up Will's hip, the warmth of his mate's skin beneath the soft lace and slippery silk enough to make him shudder with arousal.
"That doesn't surprise me. There is nothing so titillating in the world to me as a quick mind with matching wit."
"Not even a garter?" Will murmured, swaying to his touch, his lids lowering a fraction as his sex began to stir within the soft confines of the silk.
"Not even a garter,"
Hannibal whispered, leaning into him to brush his nose up Will's belly, finding his scent there beneath the fainter traces of soap and silk. His hands rose of their own accord, grasping Will's hips, hard muscle shifting beneath an ever so slight softness that gave him such delightful curves. He pressed a kiss to Will's belly, uttering a soft, possessive chuff as he caught the silk with his teeth. Will threaded his fingers in Hannibal's hair, purring as his husband's mouth moved lower, soft lips and dangerous teeth a blunt pleasure over his clothing.
"You look more beautiful in this than I ever dared imagine,"
Hannibal said, voice hoarse with desire, and Will's hips twitched in a soft spasm when he rubbed those heavy alpha fangs over the growing bulk at his groin.
"I doubt I'll ever survive what you do to me, Will."
He lifted his head, gazing up the length of Will's body to meet his gaze, his sculpted mouth parting in a grin when he added,
but I will certainly enjoy being done to death by you, my little wolf."
Will chuckled, thumb smoothing Hannibal's temples as he said, "Not for a long time yet, Hannibal. I'll try to warn you when my knees are loose."
"Please don't,"
Hannibal said, sliding from the chair to loop his arms around Will's waist.
"There are worse ways to go than being ambushed by your beautiful body, Will."
He bent and scooped Will up, hefting his weight easily into his arms to the tune of Will's surprised laughter, bearing him to his massive bed where he sat with Will in his lap, their breaths mingling and their lips meeting in a soft kiss.
"Gods, I am the luckiest man in the world,"
Hannibal breathed, groaning when Will's bottom wiggled against his groin, arms tightening as he arched up against him. He raked his teeth up Will's jaw, careful and controlled but needy, the flitting touch of Will's hands on him keying his senses tight. "I hope you'll always think so," Will said, panting softly, wedging his hand down between their bodies to find the tie on Hannibal's dressing gown. He fought the knot and pulled it free, pushing the material over Hannibal's broad shoulders. "Because once I've set my mind on something, I'm not easily swayed from it. If you want to leave, you'd best do so now."
"Gods, no, never again,"
Hannibal whispered, twisting to lay Will down on his bed, rearing up to gaze down at him, mussed and half undressed and frightening in his beauty. Will reached up to trace the curve of his lip, moaning when his fingertips were caught and sucked, Hannibal's tongue laving his skin.
"I will never leave you again, Will. Not by choice, not if I can help it."
"I'll hold you to that," Will said, his arms dropping to the bed, loose and gently folded above him, one long leg lifting to brace his foot on the bed, cradling Hannibal in the open V of his legs. He panted softly, chest heaving, belly caving with every breath above the turgid bulge of his sex. Hannibal eased off the bed, drinking in the sight of him as he shed the dressing gown, tossing it against the chair without looking. His light linen pants quickly followed, flung away with impatience and trembling excitement.
"I could marvel over you forever, Will,"
he whispered, standing tall before him, every inch a virile alpha in his prime, his rich scent promising pleasure and satisfaction, the heavy weight of his sex pulsing eagerly between his thighs in a dizzying display. It stirred beneath Will's gaze, and he felt a thrill of disbelief that he could accommodate it, his body growing soft and wet with anticipation. Hannibal branded this moment into his memory, his beautiful, sultry mate gazing up at him, with that gleam in his eyes, a vision of lithe limbs and limpid eyes and full lips, his mouth parted as if poised to scold him or praise him. He would gladly take either, and gladly spend the rest of his life anticipating which would come first, a caution or a kiss. Will moved against the bed, a slow undulating of his body that ended at his toes. He brushed his foot up Hannibal's hip and down his thigh, his impish delight apparent in the way he smiled. For all his talk of coldness, Will was always so warm and responsive to Hannibal's touch, curious and adventurous, yet gentle with him when others had never bothered to be.
"I swear to all the gods, the world reached its pinnacle of perfection in you, Will,"
Hannibal breathed, his swollen sex giving another pulse as his eyes raked Will's form once more, the delicacy of the silk and lace complementing the strength and sturdiness of Will's toned, young body. "I was just thinking the very thing about you," Will murmured, another slight arch of his back shifting him against the covers, unspoken invitation for his husband's touch. Hannibal's hand clasped Will's calf, cupping the firmness of it as he dropped a teasing bite on Will's bent knee. He kissed the reddened skin, eyes closed, and nibbled a trail down the inside of his thigh, sighing with delight as his mate's scent grew stronger with desire. Will wriggled restlessly, his braced leg falling to one side as Hannibal kissed and sucked his way higher, every teasing whisper of lips and tongue pushing Will's arousal to greater heights. The sensation of the silk over his heated, hard sex was exquisite, a sensual pleasure all its own, but no match for the shivering tightness that gripped him to feel Hannibal's hot breath spill over the crease of his thigh. Hannibal eased Will's legs further apart, stifling a moan to see how the silk had darkened between his legs, clinging wetly to his body, the pout of his slit revealed in every detail beneath the taut bulge of his member. He stroked his fingertips over the puffy little lips that held Will from him, uttering a soft, pleased chuff when his mate twitched at his touch. He brought his fingertips to his mouth, the salty, meaty taste of Will's body flavored with sweetness, an intoxicating combination Hannibal wanted to eat from his flesh with kisses.
"How can anyone be so beautiful?"
he whispered, brushing his fingers up the fullness of Will to trace the straining length of him, quivering and trapped beneath a layer of silk, a spot of wetness growing where his tip pressed up tight. Will pushed up on his elbows, trembling with arousal, snared by the sight of Hannibal crouched between his legs, as if ready to devour him whole. His body surged in response to that image, the pleasure of feeling those sharp teeth in his flesh again, being pressed with Hannibal's weight and thrashing for breath as he was brought to screaming release. Hannibal grazed his fingers down his sex again, and Will half-sobbed, pushing against the touch. The light teasing pressure over the slick slit felt like heaven, and his head dropped back to bare his throat, long and gleaming in the firelight. He almost came out of his skin when the touch was followed by the dragging sharpness of Hannibal's teeth over him, finding and lightly teasing his head through his clothing. Will cried out, dropping back on the bed, one hand shooting out to clench in Hannibal's hair, both warning and encouragement. He moaned with frustration when Hannibal delved between his thighs, needing more, canting his hips up against his husband's seeking mouth. The delicate silk was no match for Hannibal's sharp alpha fangs. It tore with a soft purr of wet cloth, and his hot tongue slipped beneath the fabric, curling up into Will's body to plunge deep. Will tipped his hips to Hannibal's mouth, panting harshly when his clever tongue found and teased that tight ring of muscle that would trap his knot. His body clenched, squeezing down around him in a teasing echo of the pleasure to come, another sobbing moan torn from him when his sex was cupped and squeezed through the soft silk. "Please, Hannibal," he breathed, hips rocking, slowing against his hand, against the soft graze of those sharp teeth against the blood-flushed lips of his slit. Pleasure pooled in his belly, deep and looming, always ready to rise to his husband's touch. His fingers clenched in Hannibal's hair, working rhythmically in time with the slow rock of his hips, his moans growing thready with need. Hannibal drew back, his breath coming in ragged pants.
"You taste even better than your scent promises,"
he purred, a quick jerk of his fingers snapping the final threads of silk that kept him from his husband's soft flesh. The tight weight of his sex peeked from beneath the frayed edge of the cloth, his wet little entrance swollen and slick beneath. Hannibal delved 2 fingers into him, his breath stuttering with desire as slick heat clutched tight around his curled fingers. He lowered his lips to the straining length of Will's sex, leaving it beneath a layer of saturated silk. The loose cloth gave to his mouth, and he pulled Will's head between his lips, wrapped in silk and leaking with need. "Hannibal!" Will cried, a note of warning in his voice, his fingers giving a painful tug that neither of them noticed. He squeezed down around the curled knuckles working inside of him and arched up, sobbing with aching pleasure at the sensation of being sucked through his clothing, the sharpness of it muted but somehow amplified by the barrier between his needy sex and his husband's clever mouth. He abandoned himself to it, arching in time with the pressure of Hannibal's lips and tongue, feeling the weight of climax layering in his groin until it grew too much to contain. It broke from Will on a shocked, gasped cry, his back arching and his hips canting, legs drawing up as his body heaved and pleasure flooded him. Every nerve in his body sang with the force of it, a shudder shaking him as he spilled himself in Hannibal's mouth, his seed greedily sucked from the cloth until he was a panting, writhing mess of raw nerve endings and relief. Will's body slowly relaxed around Hannibal's fingers, the thrum of his sex slowing to a pounding pulse that echoed the thundering beat of his heart. Hannibal gave him one last lingering suck, and lifted his head, easing back to admire the sight of Will before him. "It's ruined," Will panted, relaxed and languorous in the afterglow, the reddened head of his sex sliding from beneath the slick fabric where he brushed his fingers down his belly.
"I thought it might be the first few times,"
Hannibal told him, bringing his slick fingers to his lips to suck them, eyes closing in bliss. He bared his fangs in a slight, wry smile when he said,
"I ordered 2 of everything, just in case I couldn't control myself."
"I like it when you can't control yourself." Hannibal moved over him like a shadow, liquid with grace and purring with heady intent as he kissed his way up Will's eager body. He found Will's lips in the half-darkness and kissed him breathless, letting Will taste the salty sweetness of himself on his lips. Will's legs twined around his hips, pulling him close. Hannibal groaned softly at the feel of silk and hot flesh against his heavy body, the tightness of Will's member against his own, slick and firm above his wet, ruddy little entrance.
"You drive me to distraction,"
he breathed, nipping Will's earlobe, biting a trail of bruising kisses down the graceful length of his throat to dip his tongue into the hollow of Will's collarbone. Nicholas said you feared you might expire seeing me in such a thing? Will teased, tipping his shoulder to urge Hannibal lower, his nipples tight and straining.
This undergarment,
Hannibal said, plucking at the strap with his teeth before nuzzling the softness of Will's petite breast.
A dressing gown, a bathing sheet. I would fear for my life seeing you in a flour sack, Will. You are a menace to my rational thought.
No more than you are to mine, Will said, breath catching on a hitching moan when Hannibal mouthed his nipple through the silk, lashing it with his tongue until the cloth starkly outlined his pert little peak. Hannibal shifted onto his elbow, hips pressing Will into the bed. He cupped Will's chest with his hand, shaping the soft curve with his palm to mound it for his lips. His amber eyes rolled up to witness the pleasure on Will's face when he sucked him, drawing on his nipple through the cloth. Will moaned, the sound pulled from him in a throaty purr, his legs folding tighter around Hannibal's naked hips. Hannibal purred against his skin, rubbing Will's flesh with the tip of his tongue before carefully closing his teeth around it. He gave it a slight, teasing tug, and Will sobbed, surging beneath him in shocked pleasure. He wanted to take his time with Will, wanted to kiss every inch and pay homage to him, to love him and cherish him until they were both too exhausted to do more than fall asleep in one another's arms. Will untangled one hand from Hannibal's hair and tugged at the strap, attempting to free himself, aching to feel his husband's lips on bare skin. Hannibal gave him another suck and ran his tongue along the neckline of Will's lingerie, nudging and pushing and tugging it with such eagerness that the strap snapped free, the strain on the delicate fabric too great to withstand. He bared Will's breast with a pleased growl of victory, rocking his hips against Will's groin to feel the exquisite pressure against his eager sex. The reddened, tight nub of Will's large nipple strained from the slight curve of his breast, more delectable than any feast and more treasured than any precious stone. Hannibal bent his head and gave it the attention it was due, suckling Will until he squirmed and moaned, his slender body writhing with a growing need. "Hannibal," he breathed, tugging on him, his slender legs pulling, urging him up. "Hannibal!"
I want to take my time,
Hannibal said, his voice unsteady, trembling with the aching need to push himself deep inside of his mate and be as close to a single body as this world could ever grant. Will pushed him up just a fraction, the torn neckline of his beautiful bodysuit baring his pale chest, his cheeks flushed with passion, and his lips red from where he had sunk his teeth in a vain attempt to hold back his moans. He stroked his hand through Hannibal's hair and rubbed his fingers beneath his jaw, whispering, "We have all our lives, Hannibal."
"God's will,"
Hannibal moaned, seized with a sudden frenzy, those words more powerfully arousing than they had any right to be.
"I wish we never had to leave this bed again."
"We don't," Will panted, groping down his body to touch him, cupping him and squeezing him to coax a thick dribble of wetness from the tip. Just the firm surety of Will's fingers on him tested Hannibal to a dangerous degree. Will gave him a slow stroke, and for a trembling, terrifying moment, Hannibal feared he might spill himself against Will's slick white belly and the torn remnants of his clothing. "Shh," Will soothed, sensing it, though it didn't keep him from swirling his fingertips over the head of Hannibal's sex, just as he knew he liked. "We have all night, every night, for as long as we like, Hannibal. I want you too much to be patient now." Will wiggled him into place, both of them breathless when he caught Hannibal's sex between his legs, the warm, welcoming heat of his wet body slowly giving to the wide press of his head. It was a sensation Will knew he would always delight in, a momentary panic that it was too much, that split second where he tensed for pain, and instead felt a satisfying spread as he opened in welcome, sheathing Hannibal's hard body like a velvety glove. Hannibal's breath left him on a deep, throaty moan as he settled deep, teetering on the cusp of orgasm with such immediacy that his knot was already rising. He worked his arms beneath Will, cradling him close, and rolled his hips in a slight motion that made them both groan. It was slow and easy, bodies sliding together as one, rocking in an easy rhythm. They lay coiled together, scenting one another, touching one another, and purring their pleasure.
"I love you,"
Hannibal whispered, breathing it against Will's lips, capturing his mouth with hungry kisses, saying it over and over like a prayer. The gentle roll of his hips pushed both of them closer and closer to the edge. The The bond echoed his words, bringing Will almost to tears with the sweetness of it, every lovely moment of his past forgotten in the warmth of his husband's loving arms. Twined around one another, as tight as they could manage, covered in kisses and treasured, it overcame them both as one, and Hannibal pushed deep, shuddering as Will captured his knot with a soft cry, tying them together so much deeper than flesh and bone.
"I love you so much, Will,"
Hannibal panted, wincing at the painfully sweet constriction that milked his orgasm from him in a slow, sweet pleasure, almost unbearable in its intensity. He lay draped over Will's pliant, relaxed body, entwined in mutual fulfillment and breathless with the force of it. Will arched against him, slow and studied, working his knot and rubbing his slicked length of his sex against Hannibal's furry belly, chasing another orgasm that came in a deep, aching rush, the contractions of it squeezing Hannibal's sensitive sex and knot. Their kisses grew less urgent, softer, soothing as the sharp peak of their pleasure subsided to the bliss of knotting. Will nuzzled him, languid and boneless as his body coaxed Hannibal's knot with rhythmic squeezes, Hannibal's euphoria feeding his own. It left him lingering on the border of satisfied sleep, one lazy lid lifting when Hannibal levered up close enough to drag the tattered remnants of his clothes off. "Such a shame," Will murmured, smiling and stretching against the covers before subsiding.
"A damned fine investment, you mean,"
Hannibal corrected, settling back over him in a drape of warmth.
"Gods above, I never feel the difference in our ages more than in these moments, Will."
"Despite your being an old man," Will teased, smoothing Hannibal's back and grinning when he stiffened, "I do enjoy myself immensely."
"As well you should,"
Hannibal said, delving into his throat with an offended growl.
"Because I am an excellent lover."
"I'll have to take your word for it," Will said, biting his lip on an amused smile at Hannibal's indignant chuff. "When you're too old to please me, I suppose I should just take a younger man as a lover and find out." Hannibal lifted his head to stare at him, aghast, and Will chuckled. "Several of them, even. No less than 10, I should think." Hannibal's eyes widened painfully, and Will dissolved into raspy laughter, stroking his face and planting a soothing kiss on his parted lips.
"Your humor is perverse,"
Hannibal informed him, an unwilling smirk curving his mouth as Will laughed, mirth dancing in his blue eyes. "And yet he smiles," Will teased, kissing him again, drawing his long legs up Hannibal's and down again. Hannibal's smile softened, turning rueful when he quietly admitted,
"You might need to, some day, you know. When I'm too old to be of any use."
"Don't be absurd," Will said, drawing him down to nuzzle him, a small shock of sensation jolting him from the shift of Hannibal within him. "I'll still be able to wheedle you, even when you're old."
"Ah, Will, you truly are one of a kind."
Hannibal sighed, his deep chuckle rumbling in Will's chest. He tucked his nose in the bends of Will's throat, rubbing his lips against the mark he'd left. His voice was soft and gentle when he whispered,
"I wouldn't condemn you for it, you know."
"Wheedling you?"
"Taking a lover. I would never begrudge you a moment's happiness, Will."
"That would never make me happy, Hannibal," Will murmured, concentrating on the exquisite fullness that satiated him so thoroughly. "The pearl necklace you promised, however." Hannibal uttered a soft, throaty moan, a frisson of arousal running through him at the memory of Will in that gleaming pearl necklace. "Though that wasn't the one you had in mind," Will teased, shifting beneath him. Both of them caught their breath as Hannibal's slackened knot slid from Will's tight body in a pulse of hot flesh and slippery seed.
"Well,"
Hannibal said, lifting his head to kiss Will's full lips,
"we do have the rest of our lives."
Will chuckled, their comfortable closeness interrupted by the soft scratching at the washroom door. With a rueful brush of his lips over Hannibal's, he murmured, "Winston apparently wishes to join us."
"Well, we can't have him being lonely, and he chose an excellent time to push his luck,"
Hannibal purred, easing himself slowly from Will's body to lay at his side. He distracted himself with another soft kiss, reluctant to leave his mate, but grudgingly sat up when Winston began to whine.
"He is very lucky he means so much to you."
"And you," Will insisted, shivering with the loss of Hannibal's heat when his husband left their bed, the glowing coals of the dying fire doing little to warm the vast room. He sat up and worked the layers of covers down, dragging them up over his naked body where they warmed quickly against his sweaty skin. Winston leapt up on the bed, tail wagging with excitement as he nosed into the covers to find Will's face and lick it. But even after his joyous reunion, Hannibal still hadn't returned to bed. "Hannibal?" Will called, curious, absently stroking Winston's head. He pushed up on one elbow when he heard his husband at his bureau, shifting things around in the near darkness, and gave Winston a push toward the foot of the bed, murmuring, "Lay down, Winston. You can stay on the bed." Hannibal stalked back toward him, the moonlight coming in through the part in the curtains, turning his tawny skin pale gold. He was magnificent to Will's eyes, his tall frame held with a dancer's tight grace, broad shoulders straight, hips lean above the taut length of his thighs as he moved to crouch at the bedside. "What are you up to? Come back to bed," Will urged him, cupping Hannibal's high cheek in a firm caress.
"You've made your decision, Will,"
Hannibal whispered, grasping Will's hand to kiss his knuckles. He made no move to rise. He knelt there at the bedside and gazed up at his husband, amber eyes catching the light and pooling it, almost glowing in the darkness.
"You can always change your mind. That is entirely yours to choose. But while you choose me, while you'll have me, it would mean the world to me if you would wear this."
He offered Will a familiar silver filigree box, opening the lid for him to bear the ring within. The fairy-tale woodland scene full of fey creatures and the dedication to a love long lost, but never forgotten.
"With a memory like yours, there's little point in repeating myself, but I feel I must,"
Hannibal said, watching as Will clasped the covers to his chest and shifted to sit up, his slender legs falling over the side of their bed.
"You know this is my mother's ring, and that I've always kept it for the person I would share my life with as an equal,"
Hannibal told him, smiling up at Will, the bond swelling with tenderness and hope.
"I said it once at Marsham Heath, and my certainty has only grown with time, Will. That person is you. That person will always and only be you."
A soft, delighted laugh escaped Will's lips, almost a sob, the sharp, almost painful love he felt threatening to overcome him. He pressed his hand to his mouth to stifle it, to hold it back somehow, but it escaped in happy tears that rolled down his cheek to drip from his jaw.
"Will you wear it?"
Hannibal whispered, reaching up to smooth his tears away, still holding the box aloft. Will nodded, drawing a breath that shuddered, thick with tears. Hannibal plucked it up from the box, kissing Will's fingertip before he slid the ring onto his finger. It fit as if it had been crafted just for him, gliding onto his slender finger with ease to settle into place, engulfing his ring finger from the base of his hand to his knuckle in precious silver.
"I love you so much, Will,"
Hannibal breathed. He bent his head over Will's hand and kissed the ring, kissed his fingertips and the bend of his wrist, sighing with content happiness when Will's hand spread to cup his face. "And I love you, Hannibal," Will whispered, the words soft and broken by tears but dizzying with joy, accompanying a wide, excited grin that made Hannibal's heart leap in his chest. Hannibal stared up at his husband, dumbfounded, but the bond said more than words ever could. It swelled with such force that Will laughed with pleasure, leaning over to loop his arms around Hannibal's neck in a tight embrace.
"Will,"
Hannibal whispered, swallowing hard to force down the tightness in his throat, but it refused to be contained. He moved in one fluid motion to catch his little mate up and bear him back on the bed, Winston uttering a yip of indignation.
"Gods, say it again, Will, so I can be sure I heard it."
"I love you, Hannibal," Will said, his mouth curving in a smile as they scented one another, searching for home in the fragrance of skin, and finding it waiting just as it should be. Hannibal's sharp teeth grazed Will's lower lip in a soft bite, and he whispered,
"Say it again."
"I love you, Hannibal."
"Say it again."
"I love you," Will said, and carding his hands through Hannibal's hair to say it over and over, curling against Hannibal as his kisses deepened, inflamed by Will's soft whispers of, "I love you, Hannibal, I love you." And no matter what might come, he knew he always would. Will had the luxury of waking well-rested and comfortable, nestled in the curl of Hannibal's warm body, with his husband folded around him in a drape of heated flesh, his nose buried against Will's throat and a soft, almost soundless purr rumbling from his chest. Will wriggled his hand free from beneath the blankets and spread his fingers, a delighted smile curving his full lips, The swirls and whirls of the silver ring caught the faint morning light, the water almost appearing to ripple, the animals seeming to move. The metal had warmed to his body heat, already a part of him, as if he'd worn it all his life. Always and forever. Hannibal shifted, burrowing against Will with a soft, coaxing growl that settled back into a low rumble of sound. Will shivered, dropping his hand to rub Hannibal's arm, toes curling as that purr vibrated down his spine. "Every morning," Will murmured, drawing Hannibal's hand to his lips to kiss his knuckles before pressing them beneath his chin in a soft marking, answering Hannibal's purr with his own. He shifted, turning to face his husband. The dim light caught on his cheek and the curve of his lip, casting the rest of his face into shadow, beautiful even with a night's worth of stubble and relaxed in sleep. Will smoothed his hand up Hannibal's jaw, smiling when his husband nuzzled against his touch. With soft wonder, Will whispered to him, "This could be our every morning for the rest of our lives." It seemed nothing in the world could taint his happiness now, except one minor detail of his past, yet laid to rest. Will pressed a kiss to Hannibal's nose, and eased out of the bed, slipping by small degrees from his clinging arms into the cold morning air. Hannibal curled around the warmth he'd left, groping in his sleep for his mate, and it took every ounce of Will's formidable determination to keep himself from crawling right back in there with him. Instead, he tucked the covers up over his husband and hastily donned his wrapper, scooping up the lingerie with little hope for its recovery. He let himself through the washroom, grinning when Winston bounded to greet him with an excited bark. "Good morning, my lord," Jimmy called, overseeing the fire being laid. "I hope we didn't disturb you. Winston was desperate to go outside this morning." "You didn't disturb me, Jimmy," Will assured him, straightening. "Have any of our guests risen?" Jimmy laughed a little and shook his head. "Not at this hour." "Good," Will said, steeling himself for what was to come. "Have Lord Reddick's valet wake him, and escort him to the dining room for his breakfast." "The dining room, my lord?" Jimmy asked, plucking the lingerie out of his hand without even a glance. "Will you be joining him?" "No. The only company he can tolerate in this house is his own, so he can eat alone while I have my bath. Have Mr. Hawkes put him in the sitting room when he's finished, and have Peter prepare his coach. Lord Reddick is leaving us this morning." "It would be my absolute pleasure, my lord." The drapes had been drawn wide in the sitting room, pouring the morning light in on the abundance of Hertford House. Staton Graham stood looking out at the grounds, his hands clasped behind his back, and his posture ramrod straight, an echo of the Alpha who had seemed large as life to Will as a child. He didn't turn when Will entered, but Will could tell by the stiffening of his shoulders that he knew he was there. "I expect you've something to say to me, having had me dragged from my bed at dawn like a servant." "There's a good deal I would like to say to you, Lord Reddick," Will told him, approaching with alert awareness and stopping out of reach just behind him. "I'll not do so with your back to me. Turn around, please." Staton turned, his blue eyes raking Will's clothing, the gentleman's gear he was more comfortable in, worn in traditional Omegan fashion, without a neckerchief, his collar open to bare his throat and display the mark of his mate's sharp teeth. "At least you're dressed properly," Staton said, not impressed by what he saw. "Mostly." "As much as it pains you to acknowledge it, Lord Reddick, I am Omegan, and dressed properly as such," Will reminded him. "Please, have a seat." Will settled in one of the stiff little chairs near the window, and gestured to the one across from him, staring at his father until Staton sat. "Now what?" Staton asked, returning his stare, shifting his bulk in the chair. "Time to gloat, is it? Time to rub my nose in it?" "No," Will said, cocking his head to regard him, opening the door to his gift all the way, giving his perception the freedom to see his father in ways he hadn't since he was a very young child. "Merely a question, father."
"Oh, and what is that?"
"Why do you hate me?" Will asked, sitting still and composed in his chair, with his hands lax on the arms, no tension in his body whatsoever. Staton's face tightened, his eyes narrowing with consideration before he said, "Who says I do?" "I say you do. Your actions toward me say you do. You do not break a child's fingers and call it love, Lord Reddick. You do not Have the staff hold a child down to beat the clothing from their back and say it has its roots in your concern for them. From my earliest awareness, you have looked at me as something that does not belong, trained me to believe I am less than human, separated me from my sisters, built a barrier between their affections and my own, until we were more acquaintances than siblings. It is incredibly difficult for me to think you have dedicated yourself to such cruelty for no reason at all.
I corrected you, William,
Staton said, chin tipping up.
When you began on a path that would lead to your destruction, I steered you from it and ensured you would never take that path again.
Path? My earliest memory is of you beating me for rocking Mina's doll. What dangerous path did you imagine I was headed down in pretending to care for a baby?
One of harlotry. Playing with dolls, gracious. What self-respecting boy?
I am not a boy, Will said, reining in his temper with difficulty, a light tremble coursing through him. I am not a boy. You curbed me from pursuits you considered feminine. You dressed me as male, addressed me as male, put me to work to educate me on positions only men were to hold, and yet in all of those things you continuously reminded me that I was not your son. You forced me to be something I am not, and when I was every bit of it that I could be, you punished me for not being enough. He paused, the faint echoes of his voice dying in the large room, both of them staring hard at one another. You created a situation in which I could do nothing but fail, Lord Reddick. Why? Staton didn't answer for a long, taut moment. When he did speak, his voice was little better than a whisper, tight and ragged at the edges like old rope.
You were the last one to be born, you know,
he said, mouth pursing with distaste.
Your sister came out with ease, but you went and got yourself stuck. You did so much damage to your mother that she was never able to bear another child. You were our last chance to have an heir, my last chance to have a son, and you ruined her.
Will said nothing, only watching him with his gift wide open, drinking in the details of his expressions as Staton spoke.
You were supposed to be a boy. You were supposed to be a boy.
Will blanched, his stomach churning. In a harsh, low whisper, he asked, You truly blamed me for something I had no control over?
I blame you for ruining your mother. I blame you for destroying my chances to have a proper son.
Will stared at him, appalled that anyone could ever be so callous. The looming, powerful alpha of Will's memories, distorted to match the man with the fear he inspired, truly was nothing more than a petty old man, aged and angry and frustrated with failures he could not bear to claim responsibility for. And so he displaced them onto an infant, preying on their helplessness, using his authority over them to exact retribution for a sin that simply did not exist.
You and your habits,
Staton hissed, baring his teeth in a snarl of disgust.
Looking through people as if they were glass. You're the reason she left us. She gave up because of you.
She gave up because she knew her husband was having an affair. My gift had no hand in that, Lord Reddick. Nor did my being Omegan have a hand in the fact that you cannot sire a son. Staton recoiled as if Will had slapped him, his eyes wide and furious. How many children have been born since Mother died? Will purred, cocking his head as he regarded his father. How many children have your women given you, and not a single boy?
Shut your mouth!
Will's chin tipped up, blue eyes hooded with thought as he regarded the man before him.
You prancing little minx. You think you're so special now, Acting like the lady of the house, high and above it all. You're a disgrace, coming here groveling for that man's favor, using everything I taught you for all the wrong reasons. Where is your pride, boy? Where is your dignity?
Will stared at him, his face falling into a blank mask of indifference.
You may have him wrapped around your little finger, but I know what you're about. You haven't saved Hertford House for anything other than impressing your husband. When it comes down to it, you've become precisely the thing I tried to save you from being, William. Simpering and showing off for your husband like a brainless little bird in a gilded cage. You weren't being useful here. You were attempting to seduce him back to your side. It's all you creatures can understand, isn't it? It's all your nature compels you to do. And the worst part is, you don't even realize it.
Oh, you are a piece of work. Stanton's face darkened with rage, but he said nothing in response, only glared at Will in fury. When I was a child, I did everything in my power to please you. I wanted so badly to have something from you which you simply could not give. And you wanted something from me which I simply could not give.
How could any man be pleased by such a wretched excuse for a son?
Stanton asked, trembling in his seat, breathing fast and hard with fury. How could any son of worth be raised by such a wretched excuse for a father? Will asked, his blue eyes boring into Stanton's, pleased when he flinched. My habit sees you, Lord Reddick. It has always seen you, even when I was a child. You are weak. He stared at his father from beneath the fringe of his lashes, weighing him and finding him lacking in so many ways. An impotent, powerless creature without self-control who terrifies helpless children to make himself feel like a man. You're not the stuff of nightmares, Lord Reddick. You're routine. You're common. You'll never be anything more than a sum of failures, doomed to watch your father's legacy get passed along to someone who deserves it. Stanton paled, his disbelief giving way to bleak horror. Your valet has packed your trunk. Your coach is waiting at the front door. You will leave this house, and once you cross that threshold, you will never darken my doorstep again, Will said, gazing placidly at his father. But before you go, just imagine for a moment, Lord Reddick, what might have been had you ever tried to love me. You'd have been a father-in-law to one of the most powerful men in our country, invited to events that would have put you in the eye of society, placed you hand in hand with those whose investments would enrich you. You would have been welcomed here, an intimate acquaintance of his grace, grandfather to the children to come, and lacking nothing in life that we could provide you. Stanton dropped his gaze, looking troubled for the first time Will could ever recall, as if it had only now occurred to him how badly he'd played the cards he'd been dealt. But you were so fixated on sacrificing me for Mina's sake, so determined to exact your misplaced need for revenge on me, that you threw it all away, Will softly said, his gift showing him the hairline cracks in his father's armor, the tiny openings for his words to slide in swift as a blade to cut him. And so here we are. I will spend my life quite happily allowing it to become common knowledge that you have fallen from my favor, and in a very short time our connection will be forgotten. You will return to Broad River alone to brood in your machinations, sequestered out in the country where your beloved daughters refuse to visit you. And every word about me, in every column of every paper you read, will burn and twist in your gut like a live coal, and you will have no one to blame but yourself. Will's smile was tight and unpleasant, as frosty as his voice when he said, I do hope I haven't disturbed you unnecessarily. I should hate for you to have yet another regrettable mistake to trouble you.
So that is it, then?
Stanton asked, drawing the tatters of his dignity around him, his pompous bravado hiding nothing from his son's perceptive eyes.
We go our separate ways and make no move to deal each other wounds? Never set eyes on one another again?
Oh, I wouldn't say that, Lord Reddick, Will said. He pushed to his feet, adjusting his ring with his opposite hand, standing tall and proud before the man who had always attempted to reduce him down to nothing. You will see me once more, I can promise you that. When you're old and failing in the twilight of your life, abandoned by the daughters you've lavished your love on, facing the grim spectre of death, I will come to comfort you as you lay dying. A slight smile spread across Will's lips, his voice falling to a low, purring sigh as he told the man who had abused him. I will sit at your bedside, watching you fade from this life, and I will console myself with the knowledge that your last sight in this world is of the child you despise. You can carry the memory of what you've done to face whatever just deserts you've earned. He smoothed his cuffs and jacket before ringing for Mr. Hawkes, aware of his father's eyes on him, weighty and considering. Mr. Hawkes opened the door immediately, attentive and stiff with dignity. "Please escort Lord Reddick to the door, Mr. Hawkes," Will said, giving him a tight smile and checking his pocket-watch. "I would see to it myself, but I haven't the time."
"Very good, my lord,"
Mr. Hawkes said, openly disapproving of Lord Reddick, as if the man could not even rise from a chair in a way that would please Hertford House's sombre butler.
"And should his grace or his lordship ask for you?"
"I'll be upstairs," Will said, drawing an even, relieved breath and tucking his pocket-watch away. "I'd like to relax a bit before our day starts, and tying some lures seems just the thing."
"Naturally, my lord,"
Mr. Hawkes said, pushing the door wide to open the way for Lord Reddick. Will whistled Winston to his side and headed for the stairs, his ears tuned to the sounds of Lord Reddick being shown the door. He thought he might look back in the end, heeding the irresistible urge to see his father packed off like unwanted baggage. But he didn't. His future lay before him, after all, and there was nothing left behind him that was worth a moment more of his precious time. Hannibal tossed in his bed, dreaming of Galley Field as it had been when he was still a little boy. He could hear his father sobbing. Everything seemed to loom around him, a child's perception of a world not scaled to suit him.
"I remember this."
He found his father with the silver filigree box in his hand, head hanging, knuckles white, weeping a name he knew was his mother's because Aunt Grace told him so. "Papa, don't cry," he said, and he felt deep and terrible dread because he remembered this.
"Leave me alone,"
his father moaned, choking on his tears, wretched with grief, and swaying from a half-empty decanter, tears stinking of alcohol. "Papa?"
"Get away from me,"
Papa sobbed, huddling in on himself.
"You can't bear the sight of me."
"Papa, please don't cry. I'm here."
"And she's not."
Papa looked at him, red-faced and half-mad, his trembling hand reaching for the bottle to tip it to his mouth.
"Because of you. How could you? How dare you be here? How dare you? Why do they love you so much, Hannibal? First Saule, now father, as if I couldn't have given them a dozen just like you had she lived."
He smelled her before he saw her, and the grown man thrashing in his bed knew she was there behind him, his father's concubine, the Lady Murasaki. "Cyrus, you're frightening him." The inflection, the soft pronunciation, the sigh that filled every word, as familiar to him as his own face, but he didn't want it, didn't want to remember her so clearly.
"What would you know? You jumped at the chance to take her place. You're as bad as he is. Both of you are nothing. Wretched little hanger-ons."
Hannibal began to cry, the child he'd been not understanding, the man he was understanding all too well. "You cannot speak to a child this way."
"Shut up. Shut up."
Her hands dropped to his shoulders. He could feel the curve of her fingernails through his clothes. "Come away, little fawn. Your father is mad."
"You don't get to judge me,"
his father shouted, and threw the case at him, flung it with such force that Hannibal flinched. But she was there, Jasmine sweet and the only mother he'd ever known, crouching with her arms around his trembling body, the silver box bouncing off her thick clothing to skitter across the floor. Hannibal stared into her dark brown eyes and cried in earnest, while his father sobbed and raged. "It is only grief, little fawn," she said, calm in the face of his father's upset. "Hush now, go back to sleep." "Mother?"
"That is not your mother,"
Cyrus shouted, looming into his face to shout it, his horror written in the lines around his eyes and the sour stench of alcohol blown out his breath.
"Do you understand that? She is not your mother. Your mother is dead. You killed her. You took her away from me, Hannibal, like you took everything else."
Hannibal clenched his teeth in his sleep, trapped in the memory, that moment he'd buried deep beneath the years of his life. The child he'd been began to sob, frozen in place with indecision, frightened and confused.
"Tell him."
She flinched, wincing when he shouted, raging like a wounded bull. Softly, she said, "I am not your mother."
"Say it!"
"I am not your mother, little fawn," Lady Murasaki said, her feelings contained behind the gleam in her dark eyes, walled up behind a fort of stoicism built brick by brick through the days of her life. Your mother is dead.
Why is she dead? Why is she dead?
Your mother is dead because you killed her.
That's right,
Cyrus said, and his ugly, miserable laughter overrode Hannibal's frightening cry.
You should thank him, Murasaki. If he hadn't killed her, you wouldn't even be here, would you? Go on. Go on.
Thank you, little fawn, she said, a lone tear slipping from her eye and sliding down the still surface of her impassive face. Thank you for killing her.
If I ever hear him call you his mother again, I swear to all the gods I will make you wish you'd never set eyes on me. Saleh deserves so much better than this.
Hannibal thrashed in his sleep, fighting the memory. He fought his way free of his dreams, waking with a gasp, one hand reaching for Will. The bed was empty, and he was quite alone. Not even Winston was left behind. All that remained was the sweet heat of Will's scent, tinged with spent sex, and a richness that made his mouth water reflexively. He sat up, catching his breath as his pounding heart slowed its pace. The scent of jasmine seemed to linger in the air, teasing his nose with memories he'd thought long forgotten, dredged up from handling the little box again last night. Keep it hidden, little fawn. Never tell him you have it. Hannibal groped for the little silver box that had held his mother's ring for nearly 40 years. He'd never questioned how he'd come to have it, not once in all these years. He'd assumed either Aunt Grace or Aunt Margaret had seen to it after his father's death, but his dreams spoke of a far different story.
I called her mother,
he breathed, rubbing his thumb over the filigree, the details of his dreams slipping away from him, but it bubbled beneath the surface of his awareness, waiting until his heart agreed with his mind enough to bear the revelations it promised. The lock clicked and Berger let himself in, calling, "Good morning, my lord. Thought I'd check and see if you'd woke yet."
Have I overslept?
Hannibal asked, a slight smile chasing away his strange unease, the last vestiges of his dreams wisping away like smoke.
I wouldn't say so, my lord,
Berger said, chuckling as he stirred up the fire. Hannibal slipped from the bed, shrugging on his discarded dressing gown and tying it closed at his waist, asking,
Has Will been up long?
He was gone before the maids came to lay the fire, my lord,
Berger said, straightening.
Price said he left some orders regarding Lord Reddick, had his bath, and was out the door with Winston before the cook crowed.
Lord Reddick?
Hannibal asked, a pang of concern darkening his brow when he thought of Will's father.
Did Price mention what?
No, my lord,
Berger said, moving into the washroom to draw him a bath.
Where is Will now?
Hannibal asked, working his feet into his slippers before daring the tile floor of the bathroom.
I couldn't say. I'll ask Mr. Ox. He'll know if anyone would.
Yes, do, please. I'm afraid my husband might have had a clash with Lord Reddick. He'll have come out on top, but I must see for myself that he hasn't taken wounds for it.
Naturally, my lord,
Berger said, filling the sink with hot water for Hannibal to shave.
I'll have you set up in your dressing room when you've finished, my lord, and check on his lordship in the meantime.
Thank you, Berger,
Hannibal said, hurrying to shave as the tub filled, anxious to lay eyes on his mate, and desperately hoping that Will's father hadn't dealt him more wounds that would scar.